Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Living the Line. I'm Carson Grubaugh, and today I'm joined by the artist Scott Finch, who sent me two really excellent books. I posted the review for them yesterday. Two very different books, too, Travel Diary and The Domesticated Afterlife. And after reading The Domesticated Afterlife, Scott, I just like, you haven't seen the review yet, but I was like, I got to try and get this guy on. I got to talk to him because it was such a rich book. I really needed to know where it's coming from. So thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and happy to talk with you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you
Yeah.
because you sent these books over gratis, and that was really great. And anytime I'm getting stuff in the mail, I'm always like, "Oh, we'll see what it is." And like, man, these ones really drew me in. So before that, I didn't have any really context for who you are or where you're coming from or anything. So if you can give me and the audience some context for your background in art and all that kind of stuff, that'd
Sure.
be great.
Sure. I went to school for painting and drawing. Got a master's degree at Tyler School of Art,
Okay.
Temple University, and I was always interested in making figurative work, work that suggested narrative, and I was always interested in the idea that you would read not just a single piece or solitary piece, but that I was building collections or bodies of work that images, uh, you know, single paintings or drawings uh, are interesting, but then creating a context by creating a body of work and having them relate to one another in an exhibition or a collection sort of enrich the work. But it took me a long time from there to the idea of actual sequence and that narrative would be more than just a suggestion or something that a reader reads into the work, but something that I built into the way that I made things. I worked exclusively as painter, drawer until I was almost 40, and
Oh,
uh,
okay.
and then at some point there, I had kind of run out of steam. I'd done a residency um, at trying to think which at Virginia, well, VCCA. Trying to think the name.
There's so
Virginia.
many residencies.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know if I don't know if people who watch this channel even know what that is, but in the fine art world, there's like a whole subculture of like just
yeah.
rogue traveling Ronins that spend 2 weeks
Right.
at different art camps, basically.
So I
So
was up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I was like, this is the first time, I had young kids at the time, and it's the first time I had like this uninterrupted block of time to paint, and it felt like I've been holding back, holding it in, or not being able to get it all out because I just literally couldn't. And I worked for about 2 weeks on paint, like just painting, like bed in the studio with me. So like really not just painting. And when it was done, I was like, I think I'm done. I don't know what else there is. I don't really don't know what I'm gonna do after this. I felt like
right.
this was okay. What I've been trying to do with painting, I think this is it, and I really don't know what I'm going to do next. So I give myself a real hard time about that for a while, and then I just said, well, I'm just going to give up until something presents itself. And I went out for a walk one day, and by the time I got where I was going, I had a story in my head, which was the first little book I did, which is called A Little World Made Cunningly, and I just got that out as fast as I could. I just like, I'm going to write this thing down. I'm going to outline it. I'm going to put it all together the best I can. And I know I don't know how to do this yet. So I'm just going to try and do it as simply and as quickly as I can before I lose it. I just didn't know where it had come from or how I was going to work my way through it. So it's just like, let's just breakneck speed just until it's done. So that was how I started with that. And then this Domesticated Afterlife was the thing I did right after that. And it took me more than 10 years, maybe 11 years of starting and stopping, giving up, not knowing where the story was going. And so then I put it down for six
Mm.
months and then I pick it up again. And I think, whose idea is this? Why am I doing this thing? Like, where's this taking me? And so when I would sort of run up against that wall, I'd set it down again. And then during the COVID, I was about halfway through with it. Um, but during COVID, it was like again this concentrated period of time, and opportunity to reflect and figure it out. And I just hunkered down. I had an opportunity to have it printed, and Antenna Press in New Orleans helped me with that. And like, okay, well, now I have a deadline. I have a reason to get this done, and I have suddenly this strange reason why I have all this time on my hands, and an isolation,
Yeah.
So I use that to
Time in
push my way
isolation
through.
helps. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
with all of the fine arts background, was comics part of that, or like you just arrived at that through your desire for something more? Because it sounds like the single image of a painting became just not enough for you.
Yeah. I mean, I've as a kid, I think probably a lot of people have that story. Is they did this as a kid, lots like made comics, loved comics, cartoons, all that stuff as a kid, and then at some point I decided I was going to be serious. I was going to be a serious artist. And so I was like, well, what does that mean? Okay, and now let people tell me what that meant. And I started to go down a path, and there was a lot of richness there, like the idea that a single image can do a lot, carry a lot, um, say a lot. Yeah, yeah, I got into that very deeply, and studying, the history of painting, and what imagery can do. Just, that was fascinating. But I also sort of gave up some of what was important to me along the way as I adopted other people's ideas of what art was. So
Yeah.
it was a thing that I had just like the idea of stories, and all of that, like that. It just had I just sort of lost it along the way, and I didn't even consider it was something I'd do. When I did the first little book, which is 120 pages or so, I had never made a three-panel comic. I hadn't made a single picture with a caption under it, but I just started with a 120-page thing because that was the thing that showed up and insisted on being done. So I do, yeah, I'm just kind of fumbling backwards, following my intuition.
And like, had you quit reading comics and stuff? Or, like, because there's a lot of sophisticated storytelling and stuff in the works that seems like you're like pretty familiar with the medium and how it works.
I think I was doing that as I was learning as I was going. So I was doing a lot of
Okay.
reading as I was making the first thing, and not with any idea of what to reach for. And certainly there's no bookstore where I live that has all of that readily at hand to browse or to figure out. So leaning on people that I knew and respected to sort of point me in a direction to say, have you read Promethea? Have you read The Invisibles? Things like that to start with, and then finding my way into more sort of indie, like other kinds of languages and ways of drawing and making things. But just starting wherever there was a hint from somebody around. Oh, you're doing what? Oh, you got to listen, watch, read this or check out this thing. But yeah, at first there wasn't a lot of literacy there. It was just how to do it, you know. So,
And
and even oh gosh, I looked at this. I looked at this the other day thinking we're going to have this talk, and there's so many clumsy, clunky parts in it and things that just make me uncomfortable. But because I'm just sort of figuring it out as I go.
well, but it has that. It's interesting that you said Promethean and Invisibles kind of early on because there is that's like the thing I really want to dig into is the mysticism of it.
Yeah.
Like I looked in. I think I was just looking to get a thumbnail for the review video, and like so I was just looking on the internet for a good image, and I saw a review where someone was like, "Oh, it's I forget what they said. They said an absurdist something or another," and I was like, "What the hell are they talking about?" Like they just didn't understand the language that he was speaking. Because to me, like this is a set of symbols that's if you know what they are, they're it's dense, but you can follow it. And so I thought that that was kind of that was
I,
an absurd claim. So
I
I
I
really want
think
to
that
get into that, the
yeah,
background in that kind of imagery and thought.
I think that idea of absurdism. I think that some people read this as, oh, this is about class. It's about you know some kind of a hierarchy in society, consumerism. Like it's like that. It's maybe just some kind of a parody or a satire
Mm,
about that, and that is a reading, you know. But I don't think that's all that's. Hopefully, that's not all that's happening there. So
no.
yeah,
It seems like that would be the most base level skin on it is kind of like I think the connection I made is it seemed a bit like Terry Gilliam's Brazil in that you have this like weird surreal like bureaucracy going on throughout the
you're speaking to me. Yeah, yeah,
which and the other thing that was strange like is throughout this book there's these things where it really felt like the book was speaking to me. Like I almost felt a little bit schizophrenic reading it because I was seeing a lot of myself reflected back. Like there's things that are in the abolition of man. I don't know if you had a chance to
I
see,
haven't been able to get my hands on it yet, but I'm excited about it. Yeah,
but one of the main there's a two-part story in there called Hodtech, which is my Terry Gilliam like corporate surreal thing, and it's all based around the slogan which you also use in here, which is "There's nothing new under the sun," and
yeah.
the slogan that they chant in the Hodtech story that I did is "In the world where there's nothing new under the sun, choose to change the sun." And you have, I'm trying to find the
Ha!
page. You have a variant on that. Do you know off the top of your head how you present it in here? I'm trying to find the page.
Um, I have no idea exactly what you're referring to, but this is from Ecclesiastes, right? So
Yeah.
you know, you've got some of that stuff bumping around in your head too, I'm sure. Must
Yeah,
have
you
had
have
some Sunday school or something.
yeah, well, yeah, I was raised that way, but you have the character, the main corporate guy, and a
Yeah.
couple times there's always something new under the sun is the big
Oh yeah. And the sun
what
is a
Sarf says, yeah.
right, and the sun is not the sun in the sky. The sun is uh is the source of all consumer uh satisfaction, right? So, yeah, that's the Sun Corporation in the story. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So in your world, the sun is like this false ideal that everyone's chasing after of the next new thing.
or a way to, you know, like there's a character that talks about trying to like they're trying to scratch an itch. They can't. That they're trying to figure out something that will do the job, that will satisfy, you know,
Yeah.
um, and that might that's not necessarily working, you know. Yeah,
It's really interesting. Like I said, I mean that's really early on in the book too, and I saw that, and then like right next to his head, you have a sigil as well, which was something. And when you're saying invisible, it's like okay, yeah, like Grant Morrison. I don't know. When I was doing the review, I was like, I don't know if he was getting this from Grant Morrison or other places, but that was something I screwed around with a lot. And there's even a point where you use the character's name Ennead, I think, and you make
hmm
a sigil for it. Like
hmm
you take the letter forms and make a symbol out of it. And I thought, I know, like that's exact. Like if I had to make a sigil out of that, that's probably the exact
right.
combo of forms that I would have done. And it was creeping me out. That's why I said this is almost like a schizophrenic read for me. I think because there are those same touchstones, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. That's you know, not everybody's going to find those little things in there, so it's really nice to know that you did. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so can you talk about your interest in like did the mysticism develop with reading? Because for me it was Promethea. Like Alan Moore is so overwhelming in that book. Like you kind of have to buy into that, and Grant Morrison a bit as well. Or is that something that predates reading those things?
I think it probably goes further back than that. I was sort of I pretty exhaustively read Carl Jung and you know, a lot of stuff on mythology and Hellenistic strains of religion, and especially Gnosticism.
Mhm.
But Gnosticism, Manichaeanism, all those interesting offshoots, outgrowths of Christianity that went a different way, that reinterpret those texts that we know. Um, those were probably more primary sources for me, like
Okay.
all of that stuff. But just as a way of frequently people will say, "Oh, that's such a turnoff that oh, why do you want to look at those old books?" But for me, it's a way of finding people who are talking about creativity. Oftentimes, those creation myths, those creation stories, are stories about creativity. There are stories about people looking inward, or people trying to understand what's going on around them, and um, you know, through just such a beautifully idiosyncratic lens. And for me, that was where it started. But definitely those, I mentioned those authors because it was like, oh, okay, so somebody's already, they're trying to do that. People can do this in this format. Like there's a way to communicate those kind of ideas here. That was really exciting to me to see that happening, and just to imagine, well, maybe I can do something like that too. I don't know. I mean, obviously, maybe much less elegant, but thinking along those lines.
Well, when you have J.H. Williams III doing your art for you, you can get as elegant as you want.
Yeah,
I'll be so lucky. So were those concerns part of your fine art practice as well?
yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I mean, I'm still making things like the things in the travel diary are like the thing that's behind my head right here, this backdrop, that
Hmm.
comes out of that. I'm still making paintings and drawings and collages and things like that too. And those kind of the idea of yeah yeah those sort of spiritual ideas or metaphysical ideas they're still, they don't go away.
Yeah, they get in deep. And you're correct. I was definitely raised in like a non-denominational, born again Christian.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were as well, like
Well,
branching out and finding these different interpretations of Christianity.
I was actually raised by some pretty lapsed Catholics, but then
Okay.
when I was in high school, I ended up at a talk in tongues, very end of the world kind of high school, like in a Christian high school like that,
Okay.
um, and it had a big impression. It left a big dent in me because I would say, well, these people are nuts. They're in their own little world. They I don't know where the hell, I don't know what they think they're doing. But then there's also this authenticity about it, and there's something real happening for them. They're having a real experience with something that I'm just not used to at all. I'm used to church being a place where you just drift off and go to sleep. You just try to stay awake. And
Yeah.
these people are feeling something. Something's going on here. And so I think, well, their beliefs are disgusting,
Yeah.
but there's also this authenticity and this real connection they're having to something. So it definitely left an impression on me, and to think, and they know these scriptures, they know this stuff, and it has a meaning for them. They connect to it on a certain level. They find solace in it, and I thought, well, I never thought about any of these texts, that, and they live by them. I think that they're doing it in a very literal kind of way, and not with a lot of depth a lot of times, but
Yeah.
there's something going on there. I want to know what is actually going on, and where did this come from, and you know, anyway, that all fascinated me. And certainly a jumping off point. And yeah, that's continued through a lot of my work, in any medium.
I could see that being a hell of an experience. I remember the first time I went to a church where they were just kind of flinging tassels around and stuff, and I was like, "What in the world is going?" Like it felt like as someone who was like raised in as like bland kind of mega church type of
Hmm.
Christianity as you could get. like when I went to one of those, it felt almost demonic to me.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like the like people shouldn't be behaving like this. Like if this is what
Right.
God does to you, like I
Right.
don't trust that thing. I
Right.
can't even imagine coming from Catholicism into that
Right. Right. Right.
intense.
Yeah. That's
Um,
exciting though. Interesting.
yeah, so that's like what I think part of the reason, the main reason I resonated with this is it sounds like we've kind of had similar intellectual journeys. Like I was very into Gnosticism for a while, like as a not specific set of beliefs, but a general idea, and have found that to be problematic. Uh, the
Hmm.
the later I go, and your book seems
Oh
to
yeah.
suggest that as well, in multiple parts, like staying more grounded.
Yeah. 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 For sure.
Um, and then there was one other thing that I really wanted to ask about. It's been a while since I did it. I mean, I could go through on any page and try and break apart the symbolism with you in an interesting way, but you use the term rebarking at some point, and I would like to hear
Uh-huh.
you talk about that a little bit.
The rebarking. We
Yeah,
got it.
what is that for you?
We've got embarking. We've got disembarking. We've got rebarking. Do you have that image?
Uh, I would have to find it there.
It's towards the back somewhere.
Yeah, it
What do
was
you
just
think it is?
well, I took it in like the literal sense, like you've disembarked and now you've got to get back on the boat. Um, oh,
Oh,
it
there's somewhere
faded
there.
you out. There you go. It's blurring you out with your
There's
image
kind of
there.
like two. Yeah, I know, I know. I got this weird background, but there's a couple of images kind of talk about it. Um, yeah, the whole end of the book is it starts to the narrative, the sort of straightforward structure starts to get a little more poetic and a little more visual and a little less literal. And the rebarking, what did you take that to be?
Well, it was really interesting because I've had this kind of thing going on for the last couple months where I become obsessed with the symbol of the tree. Um, and so it was obvious that like you've disembarked, you've embarked, and you could rebark, you could get back on the ship. But it really struck me as like I've been thinking a lot about linear, or we had a guest, Alexis Deacon, who pointed out to me that I was talking about progression as linear, and you could also see it as expanding like a tree. And that really blew my mind, and I've been thinking about that a lot. And then like I think within a couple days I got your book and read that and saw the rebarking, and it was like that you could also have that interpretation of like the tree bark, like rebarking the tree and making a healthy tree and kind of having healthy roots and an expansional idea of progress rather than this linear view. And I think your book is kind of circular too, like you have
There's
that.
circles and spirals throughout, right? Like
Yeah,
it's a continuous motif that, and some of it is um, about this idea, the spiral, the widening gyre of spiraling kind of progress thing, and then this ambition to maybe shift that back into a circular, the relationship between those two things, the spiral and the circle, and linear progression. And the other thing about a bark is that it's a thing that a dog does, a thing that a
yeah.
dog says when a dog is and they're doing it all together. They're doing it all together, and in sort of coming together uh,
Hmm.
after sort of after having something has changed. A change has happened that's brought them together, um, and uh, a, an exclamation. It's a shared calling out, something
Like
like
getting
that.
your voice back almost is kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. There, and that seems to be the major theme throughout the book. Obviously, even the title Domesticated Afterlife is suggesting, there's a suggestion there that the domestication is where we've gone wrong in a sense. like I don't see it so much as about consumerism rather than stepping outside of nature and into society.
Right, which is what that's sort of how it starts, is with a discussion of that idea. Um, and a lot, the other thing you see a lot is that as sort of a dream that or an idea set, or a reality that's been established by others, laid down by others, if that means historically in another life, or in an earlier time, or by other hands or other beings, that you find yourself sort of stuck in and confused by and unable to affect a change within, that kind of thing. You
Yeah,
find you wake up in a world, and who's made it, and what do you do about it, and how do you make your way in it? Yeah, it's, yeah, certainly more about that. Yeah, for sure.
do you feel like through doing the book that you were able to formulate that more for yourself, like your own way, your own path?
For sure. I know I couldn't have said I couldn't have had these thoughts, um, until maybe, until after it was done, and put away, and printed and sent out into the world. And at some point after that, I started to figure out what it might be about. Really, it was bigger than I could hold in my head or understand, altogether. Um, so yeah, certainly when I started it, I had no idea where it was going, or I could tell it had something to tell me, but um, I think I'm the last to know, that's
Really?
often the case when I make things, is yeah, I have to finish making them before I have any idea what am I talking about? What is this? But I do think it holds together somehow, and I don't know why that is. So, um, yeah, I'm happy about that.
To me, it felt very, I don't want to say 100% pre-planned, but I very much feel like you knew what you were trying to say, and you have an intense body of not just language but symbols that like were pre in the toolbox, it seems like to me, and that those were
Yeah.
leveraged ahead of time and kind of intentionally. So it's surprising to hear that it's
Well, there's something to that too, which is, like I say, I've been painting for a long time, so that's a place where those images are growing.
okay.
You have this body of visual imagery from, decades of making work, and so there's a language there, but it was never languaged in English. It was always just a thing that existed in this visual realm, and was discovered. That, like the drawing behind me, or in the travel diary, things like that. Most of my drawing, or most of my work, whatever the medium, starts with automatic drawing, and
Hmm.
um, just, I don't know what this is about. I'm working. I'm letting it just happen on the page, and then I see what that is, and then I respond to that, and I build it up. But I have that this, working in a book, though, causes you to spend more time with those images, look at them different ways. You're going to draw them again. You're going to put words around them. You're going to start to think about, um, what's cooking there, in a way that I can say I didn't do working strictly visually. So yeah, I think it was there, but it was, I don't know. Like I say, yeah, I think it takes me a while to figure out what's actually cooking.
I'm a bit jealous of that because I've always had like you were talking about, you go on a walk and you get like the download, and you're like,
Yeah.
I've got it and I got to go home and now I got to make it. For me, it's always been that download, and I'm really jealous of people who like, oh, I don't know what it's about till it's over. Like I always know what it's about at the beginning, and then it's just labor, and by the time I'm done with it, I'm like, that was a dumb idea. I don't believe that anymore, and I've moved on to the next thing. So I'm really jealous of that.
Well, I'll tell you the agony of, like, I haven't figured out what the next thing is. I don't know where. I don't know if it'll ever come. So, it seems to me you're prolific, and you keep trucking, and that is a blessing. Whereas I really don't know what's going to happen next, and that can be weird. That can be rough sometimes. But I'll just keep drawing, keep drawing in the meantime, see what happens.
Well, and there has been like one point, I know that sounds crazy, but like one point in my life, 2018, when I finished up Strange Death pretty much, that
Hmm.
I was like, okay, I think I'm done. I don't have anything left to say. And it was a really, really weird spot to be in as an artist, but that did let me play a little bit more.
Hmm.
And I am finding that in the play, it's a lot more fun and revelatory at least. But then yeah, then the ideas download and you're like, okay, shit, now I got 15 years worth of work. Well, there that goes. Um,
But that's so satisfying too, to just to have that work, to be in the middle of it, and to have that to do. So it's exciting. Yeah.
well, I mean, but your approach seems like, okay, I'm just as long as you keep moving your hand, right? Like it will
That's
come.
kind of it. Yeah.
And you're talking about also like getting these images and then kind of returning to them. And that was something I found very compelling about the travel diary book is at first these all look like you just sat down and drew these images, but as I start going through it, like very quickly I realize that all of these compositions are made out of a much smaller collection of drawings and then
Right.
you're recomposing them. So could you talk about that process and
Um, well, it's another way of thinking about sequence and thinking about how narrative might emerge. I was making postcards. I was taking drawings and running them through the copy machine and reducing them and cutting them up to make little postcards, and and just playing with them, just open kind of play. And then I started to think about, well, I like that image. I want to have another, just start to like, what happens if I double it? And I had sort of made a bunch of these little postcards, and I happen to have them all kind of laying out on a table. And you can see that book's pretty much set up on these three sort of horizontal strips to make a
Mhm.
page. That's where that came from, was just, okay, sort of letter-sized postcard thing that I was putting in the mail. And when I have a few of them together, it's like, okay, so this really reads as a page of this. You can read this left to right. You can read it as an overall composition, just like any painting or something. But it suggests reading left to right, top to bottom as well. It doesn't insist on it, but it suggests
Yeah.
that as one way to do it. And then like, okay, so what if that is what's happening? Really, just really completely backwards into the idea of narrative again. Like just when I saw it appealed to me as like, okay, so this is a way um, that a story could emerge. But instead of thinking about the subject matter as driving the story, just using the object matter, using these drawings in my sketchbook, the objects, physically cutting them up, arranging them, putting them together until I start to see the narrative emerge, and then like sequencing them. It's like, so each of those three strips, putting them in an order on a page, and then maybe if I use those same images again, what comes before, what comes after, and what suggests itself as a pattern. And then you do get that sense of, oh, we started with this character, then something happened to them, and then we came back again um, to some other place. We find them in another place at the end. There are passages that are more chaotic. There are passages that have more of a sense of rest to them. So just
Mhm.
like the surprise and play of that um, is how that kind of emerged.
And I think one of my favorite moments, I've got this page here, but it's really early on. You've got this drawing of a dog, and you have the dog both sitting and on its back. And it's the same drawing and the same position of the dog, but it looks really natural in both positions. And it's like those kind of moments that I've been trying to figure out like how to even classify these kind of relationships. Because normally I use the term poetics of form for people who are working abstractly and playing with just, but when they become like actual objects, that doesn't seem quite right anymore.
Yeah, I think it is right. I think you're still right. I went to, at Tyler, I was working with teachers who had been the students of Barnett Newman and all these the abstract expressionists. These
Mhm.
my teachers had come from that, and when they would look at my narrative work and I would talk to them about what I thought it meant or what I thought was going. They were like, "We don't care about that. That's not important. We don't want to know what your figures are doing. We want this is about building a painting, and the
Yeah.
paint for us that's about the construction of it. It's about the form, and it's about the materials and all of that. And at some point along the line, I thought, I think the imagery is materials. I think you can, the figures are materials too, and bits of narrative are materials too that you can cut up and move around and
Yeah.
play with, and things can emerge out of. It's not just paint. It's not just color. It's not just texture. These are all materials that we have at our disposal and ought to come into play if we want to. Nothing's off the table. But yeah, so I think that still works. The idea that the poetics of form. I hope anyway.
Yeah, and it shows up in the Domesticated Afterlife as well, where I mean, especially as you get towards the end and it gets more psychedelic and bombastic, what really the compositions are just like, whoa, like they're just these amazing compositions. And I
Uh,
see that as like the strength. Like I have one open right now that's like a bunch of alligators and stuff, and it's very kind of geometric, and it's just such a powerful composition. But I think there's something more to just, it's not purely just the poetics of form anymore,
oh,
because it starts to get iconic meaning back in.
yeah.
And that's where I'm like, it seems like it's not your standard narrative, and it's not purely just form, it's not pure formalism. You're like in this weird spot in the middle that I'm still trying to figure out a term
Yeah,
for.
I like that spot. That's a good spot. Because I want. I mean, in the same way that I'm saying sometimes it's a little bit out of my grasp. What is this gonna do? What are we saying here? Where's this going exactly? I think that's where things get kind of rich. Like, okay, um, we're gonna that you can build it out. That the narrative can, um, uh, yeah, it can be built in such a way that we have a story going on. We have something that's moving forward. We have our little characters on their little yellow brick road. They're going somewhere. They are all kind of they're meeting up. They're on a journey together. They have something they want to accomplish, and probably that's not the important thing, but that's the MacGuffin that keeps them trucking. And then along the way, all these things that can happen, which are bigger than we know how to really say at first. And like I say, hopefully what happens for me and what happens for a reader too is that they get figured out somewhere between the language and the imagery. Something bigger is emerging, and that's why dream is so important in this. Each character has a dream. All the characters are living in somebody's dream before this starts. They each have their own dreams that sort of shake them out of the way that they're trying to subsist, and then they walk into one on their own, like together as a group, right? And then the idea is, how do we co-create? How do we move forward and co-create a dream? Something that
Mhm.
something that will that that can work better than the one that's falling apart around us.
Very, very obviously. Did
Yeah,
Domesticated Afterlife come before Travel Diary?
yeah, yeah. Right. I mean, I finished Domesticated Afterlife, and then, like I said, I don't know where I'm going after that. I've just been drawing a lot, and
Hmm.
um, Travel Diary sort of, like came out of drawing. But like I said, the narrative is just emerging out of visual play, and I'm hoping that this way of this way of drawing, this way of making, will take me back into narrative again, including text, including sort of a more sort of clear thread that follows through at some point. But we'll see.
Well, it makes sense because earlier you were talking about like getting dumped into a society and you're kind of bound to figure out the stuff around you based on everyone else's stuff and that you're pushing against that. And I was thinking, well, that's kind of a strange view to represent in a book that is built entirely out of, well, no, I shouldn't say entirely, but almost exclusively out of kind of preloaded symbolism. Like the fact
Hmm.
that I was able to get it and interpret it, I think pretty clearly. It took me a second to realize what the hell I was reading, like because it circles back on itself. So I wanted to like read it 3 times in a row, basically, to really process it. But by the time I had like latched on to where's this all going, and okay, this is the mindset I should be in reading it, it was very clear to me. So it's a bit of a strange friction in that project that you're trying to break the bounds of what society gives you, but you have to work with what society gives you. And then I feel like with the travel diary, maybe part of what is so compelling to me about that is none of those images are preloaded in the same way, but through repetition,
Right.
by having them be at that boundary of like pure just form and linguistic icon, you're kind of finding the rub where maybe these symbols grew from originally.
Yeah, I think yeah, with the travel diary, it feels like yeah, the images, it's only through their relationship and the way they're being sort of mashed together that they start to talk. And that's what I'm really hopeful will happen, is that they will start to talk, and I'll make some new narrative. The way that the way that the domesticated afterlife works is because I like the way that this imagery holds the page. I like the way that color plays. I like the way that instead of, it breaks me out of those little rectangles, and it breaks me out of a particular way of laboring through the work. It's open in a different way. Uh, the domesticated afterlife is heavy, making that, like, and working in that way, and working with grayscale markers, and
Yeah.
page after page, and it's just, that this idea that there might be another way to operate. It's something I'm playing with, so we'll see.
Well, and it's interesting because you're like this whole book, The Domesticated Afterlife, is like this. It is Gnostic in a sense. It's like this escape plan. Almost
Yeah.
like there's this feeling of escape plan to it.
Yes.
And but you were trapped by the processes that you used. So that I don't know. That's the
Oh yeah.
interesting friction in this. Like,
It,
were you aware while you were working on it? Like, I'm trying to break out all this stuff, but I'm still like trapped in these symbol sets and these thought patterns.
well, I mean, it's I mean, it's just, so embarrassingly echoing of my own way of walking through the world, So no, I'm not aware of it. I'm a mess. But yeah, you're completely right too, that is part of what's happening there. Um, but at the same time, like, the the labor is such a labor of love. It's sometimes that you can see. I mean, I can see. I don't. Hopefully, not everybody in the world can see, but I can see where, oh, okay, you're starting to have some flow, and you can draw on these pages. Oh, this is where you got. This is where you needed reading glasses, didn't realize it yet. You were 43, and your vision was going, and your drawing is terrible, and you've lost your way. Like, I can see the ups and
Interesting.
downs in the work, and um, but I felt the whole time I felt like, by stacking these pages up, I feel like is something. It's becoming a generator. It's making something. There's energy starting to emerge out of this, and it's worth it. Whatever it is. But I really, you just hope that it does something. And I didn't have anybody read it. So, like, I worked on it for about 11 years, and nobody looked at it. Nobody saw it. So I never had any feedback on it. And so then when I hear somebody like you say, "Oh, I had no trouble reading this symbol system, reading what this imagery is trying to communicate." The first couple of times I had anybody look at it, I was like, "Well, that's a relief," because I really, you don't know.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah, to me, like as someone with like enough background in the similar things, it's an
Yeah.
obvious symbol system. But it's really interesting to me. It's helping me understand Travel Diary a little bit better, knowing that one comes after the other and that you are kind of operating like it really feels, because the other thing about like the Domesticated Afterlife is even though it's circular, it's still you're kind of in the loop in a linear fashion. Whereas I feel like Travel Diary is more kaleidoscopic. I don't
Oh yeah.
really feel like I need to jump into any one page and read it linear. I can flip back
No.
and forth, but it's not purely just an art book either. It's not like a
Right.
collection of prints.
I think it's a. I think it. I want a book to be a world. I want it to be. Oh,
Hmm.
if I inhabit this, I'm gonna understand that by spending time in it and with it. Um, I'm gonna understand a kind of a world, and I'm gonna start to have. You get into dialogue with that. I want, that for each of them, I would want that to be the case. And I think that's what this idea of narrative can do, in sequence. So, yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
How to make an inhabitable narrative.
I think it needs to, yeah, yeah. Where you want to, it's a place to spend time and to deepen in understanding and a sense, like a feeling of, or sort of sinking down into that sensibility, and but time spent is paid off in some kind of connection, you know.
Yeah, that'll be that'll be interesting because then the world will develop its own internal logic and symbolism and stuff, which is if you're looking for a way out of this world, that seems like
Yeah,
a logical.
I, I don't know what's going on, man. But yeah, I think it could be. We'll see where it goes. We'll see where it
No,
goes.
I'm just like as you're talking, I'm wrapping my brain around it like, yeah, okay, cool. That's interesting. It's a really fascinating approach. And I do see I'll tell you one thing that scared the shit out of me in the Domesticated Afterlife is the ending. I find to be um horrific in a sense, and I'm curious
Uh-huh.
about your now that it's over and you think you understand it somewhat.
Uh, I don't know if it's horrific. I think that uh, what it suggests to me is that there needs to be another one, another book, and I don't know how to write it. So, but I feel like it's just sort of like um, it's maybe some kind of a leap from one thing into the next thing, and I don't know what that next thing is yet. But that is
Hmm.
a scary thing to see. But some kind of an escape plan, like you say, like there is that kind of built into it, in a Gnostic story or something. But interesting, like terrifying. Hmm. Huh.
Yeah,
I had
well,
I
because
don't.
there's this suggestion that you're just jumping into the same thing. Like you're just
You could
moving from
be.
one bottle into the next, and it may be, like a different game, but you're kind of constantly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And maybe so. But I, I have some ideas about what that could be. I'm hoping that maybe I'll do some more with it, but I'm not there yet. I haven't figured that out yet. As you can see, I'm slow. I
No,
spent
I
a long time to put that
me
together.
me too. If I did a book this long, it would be like 20 years in the making, so for sure. No, what scares me is the suggestion that there is still something after all of this. Like when I go, I just want to be like in the void, not there. And the idea
Oh
that I
yeah.
have to go to some other afterlife is pretty terrifying to me.
Oh, well, I mean, for me to be clear, this is all about this life. And the way that I read it, these are all symbols and ways of talking about this life. It's got to happen here. As far as I'm concerned, it's not going to happen. Like I'm
Yeah.
not worried about anything beyond that in a literal sense. This sort of a metaphorical way of talking about things. But the idea that just things that came before you leave their mark and shape the way that you inhabit a life. Um, you know, yeah. And how do we unpack that? How do you figure out what to keep and what to what to leave behind and how to move forward, and to take leaps like beyond where you are, when you don't know where that is. That's what's important to me. Not a literal afterlife of any kind, but that's a great way of telling a story. Like I love uh, journeys into the underworld stories. I love
Mhm.
all those kind of things. Orpheus, like I love all of those kind of stories. Um, so the Popol Vuh,
Mhm.
these journeys into the underworld, and what you bring back from there. Um, for me, it's plumbing the unconscious. It's plumbing the depths and figuring out, bringing back something that you couldn't have rationally arrived at, that
Yeah.
might indicate a way forward.
So it makes sense that you like automatic drawing, which is something I love as well, and I make my
Yeah,
students do all the time. It's really fun to watch like a class of people who have never drawn, and you say, okay, you guys just have to draw for an hour
yeah,
with no
right.
like, and you're not allowed to preconceive your idea, and you just
Yeah,
have to draw, and they get about 10-15 minutes in and they start getting bored and they want to stop, and you're like, no, 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 now is the time that you're bored to keep moving your hand. And it's really
yes,
interesting. I almost feel like a voyeur doing it though, because you can walk around the room and you're like, oh, like I know so much about you already.
yeah,
It's creepy.
yeah. Well, my kids growing up, we would we had something we imposed at a certain point in the day when things were just breaking down. I would say, okay, it's time for the boredom hour. We're going to have the boredom hour now. We're not planning anything. We're not organizing it. We're not figuring anything out. This is you. Don't ask me to, entertain you. We're not putting down the screens, the devices. And the boredom hour they would inevitably within 10 minutes have something incredibly creative going on. But there's that uncertainty and that dread of like, what do I do with just this open block of time where I can't depend on somebody or something to take me in a direction. But
Yeah.
it's a valuable thing. Yeah, I love that with students as well. But for some people it is real distressing because they're not accustomed to it, like
Oh,
just
especially
let's see where
these
it takes
days.
you.
I
Yeah.
was watching a video actually, a guy talking about how to find purpose in life, which is a question I've really, you hear so many people talk about, uh, if you want meaning in life, have a purpose, but no one's out there telling anyone how to get a purpose. And I was like, what was this guy's suggestion? And he was saying boredom. Like,
Uh-huh.
you got to have boredom. And he said the most terrifying thing is being on the shitter without your phone. Like
Hmm.
that's the scariest thing to us these days. And so he was suggesting that, and I have been thinking about, I actually threatened my class 2 weeks ago. I said, you know what, like if I keep seeing so many phones in class, the next time we come to class, the whole class period is just going to be you sitting and staring at the wall. If you want your
Yeah,
points
yeah.
for the day, you just have to stare at the wall. And they were all like, don't do it.
Yeah,
um,
that is true torture for kids of a certain age, I think. But I think there's value in it too. So let me know how that goes. I think you'll have a riot on your hands, but be
well,
interested to see.
but you're giving me encouragement that you basically did that with your kids, right?
I did a lot, and I think they mostly remember it as the starting point for some cool things that they did. So um, yeah, let
So
me
my
know. Let me
students
know how it
my
goes.
students are going to hate me now because I'm actually going to do it, but I'll tell them that they're allowed to get up and use any of the materials in the room,
Fair enough. Fair
because
enough.
we have a studio room full of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
they're not allowed to use their phone. All right, I'm going to report back on that. Right
Fair enough.
now, Scott Finch is to blame for Art Appreciation's misery when I get back from spring break.
Oh, art appreciation. So this is a general audience of could be any kind of students. So not even the ones predisposed to sitting down with the sketchbook. This will be real distress probably.
Yeah,
It'll be
yeah. The art
interesting.
students don't have any problem. We
Yeah,
know
yeah,
how to
yeah. This
handle ourselves.
right, right. Yeah,
So it'll be a really wacky class. Um,
enjoy.
yeah, I'll report back to you what happens in that. So it's interesting to hear you talk about this entirely as like you're not actually putting any metaphysical truth on it. It's purely metaphorical.
I mean, I'm not saying there's no element of that, but for me, it's more interesting to think about it in relation to an actual life in the actual world. Like
Yeah,
life that we're here contending with or enjoying or however we're experiencing it. But like this is it as far as I can tell. We might, we got and it. If it's not, it's all we have. And anything, the only thing we can be certain of anyway. We might as well do our best with this. So, yeah, I always think of it as of all of those kind of stories as something to redirect or point back to this life, right where we are.
yeah, yeah. Have you?
Yeah.
There's a book that just came out called I think it's called The Land of the Dead by Brian McDonald and Toby Cypress. That's
No.
explicitly it's unpacking from a narrative standpoint. He's a screenwriter and he's
Uh-huh.
unpacking the journey to the Land of the Dead stories.
Yeah.
You should definitely check that
I
out.
will check that out.
Um,
Talking about Gnostic things, there's uh, in the Gospel of Thomas, and like one of the first, really a verse that I always think about. The disciples are sitting around. They ask Jesus, where do we go when we die, and what are we going to do in heaven, and all this kind of stuff. And Jesus looks at them and says, "Why are you worried about the last things when you haven't figured out the first things? You don't know what you're
yeah,
doing here and now. Why are you worried about all of that shit?"
yeah,
I think that's probably a good idea. But I think that all of these metaphysical stories are about that when read a certain way, or if they're going to have any value. The ones that resonate with you, they don't send chills down your spine because you imagine there's some kind of metaphysical reality to them. It's because they connect with your lived experience, and
yeah.
that's the good stuff.
It just took me a long time to realize that because I was raised in a worldview where you do think about these things as realities, and then even going into like Promethea, like that was a dominant worldview for me for like 10 years, taking it metaphysically
Uh-huh.
seriously instead of just like more metaphorically. And that's where I said I kind of fell out with Gnosticism, and I realized like there is no peeling back the literal veil to get to the other side. Like
Yeah.
I just need to focus on the here and now, and then it was easier to start interpreting those symbol systems as
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
like
Yeah.
present things. But then yeah, I had this really weird experience where I had that guy tell me about the tree, and then I got that Land of the Dead book, and then I think yours came like within a week or so,
Oh,
and
oh,
it
I
was
look, like I said, I don't think that's necessarily the whole story.
yeah,
It's the stuff, it's the text at hand, but certainly there's weird stuff that happens too. I mean, I'm a big believer in the library uh, fairy, that puts the right book in your hand at the right time. And I do feel like, that we do have, there are things that like the idea of the collective unconscious. There are
hmm
these sets of images or archetypal patterns that are baked in really deep, and that we might share those without ever uttering them, but and find them somewhere else. Somebody else is carrying something very similar to what you're carrying. I see that all the time. But yeah, yeah. So yeah, certainly there's all kind of stuff cooking there. Uh, I don't know how to, what to make of all that, but you do run across it.
well, what my library fairy keeps showing me right now, and I'm curious to see what your sense of this is at least I keep stumbling upon a lot of people that are trying to like do what you're talking about right now, like revalue those old stories and learn from them in a more I think yours is less explicit in your project, whereas in the Brian McDonald book I'm talking about, he's like very explicit about it. Or the big public figures, Jordan Peterson, who likes to do his like meta analysis of things like that. But I feel at least in my exposure, there seems to be a lot of this like battle over, do we need to abandon those stories and move to something new, or should we be like being like, hey, we have been abandoning those, we need to abandon like the idea that like there's really a God up there, but we need to learn these kind of psychological lessons. I'm curious if you have a sense on like how that's playing out in the public sphere now and where you land on how we should be approaching these things.
Um, you could have figured it out. I mean, everybody's got to work that out for themselves, I think. Yeah, I don't know what's happening in the popular consciousness, but you know, I think that sort of like putting a little attention on that and figuring it out for yourself is probably the project, but um, but a definitive answer for everybody, I don't know. That's not where I can't can't do that. You know.
Fair, but it just seems like it seems like a conversation that's happening societally right
Yeah,
now, where people are trying to figure out, as we like, even in your book, you're like trying to look for what comes next,
yeah.
and there's
Well,
some suggestion that you either need the symbols to get there and then you abandon them, or you should reinterpret. I don't know.
there's a little sort of poetic moment where the the Enid, the one of the main characters says, we take our disillusionment as a start.
Mhm.
Like you look back, you see it, you lose the romance of it. You think of a paradise lost, or an age of wisdom, or the founding fathers, or the text, that the inerrant text, or something that there must have been some establishing um, perfection or clarity that's been lost or perverted. Well, maybe not. Maybe when you take a look at it, you do get disillusioned with it, but that doesn't mean that that's not still our language. It's not still baked into the way we see and think and operate, right? Even if you decide, well, maybe those folks, when they sure seem like they were talking in tongues. Maybe that it seemed like they thought they were speaking. Maybe they weren't really speaking a magic angelic language, but they still have this shared language of stories and traditions, and we all we have all of that as a vocabulary. It's baked into the way we frame everything we interpret in the world. So being a little more conscious about that, understanding it better, with clearer eyes, and knowing that that's part of the way that you operate, and that everything around you operates. Oh, okay. Well, given that, what do we do next? Where do we go from here? Which I think I just keep suggesting is maybe that has to be a creative and conscious project, and it's
Yeah.
not a solitary project. It has to be a collaborative project. So I guess that's an answer.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, yeah. It is, because I mean that's one of the big questions that I think I'm asking in a lot of my stuff as well. Is that language that you're describing inherent, like, and we have to accept it, or is it just another one of the kind of external constraints that we can collectively try and work our way past? And I
Mhm.
definitely don't have an answer to that, but that's a scab I've been picking at for probably
Mhm.
20 years, is there something categorical about us that we have to have these things, or can we, like, should we be trying to evolve to the next kind of, I don't know what it is. It wouldn't be language, because language is what we're couched in, but the next kind of technology of communication, or next symbol system or something.
It's going to happen to us and around us, and afterward. I mean, it's going to happen. It's going to roll along and happen. But I don't know.
Yeah, well, and
I
it's like, but now that we're conscious enough to be like, maybe we can try and control the process. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Those are all just these, like I said, scabs that I pick at. That, yeah,
Mhm.
it's in the end we'll just wind up where we wind up, and we'll go, oh, well, that's how it wound up. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but
We
I,
we we imagined in the early days of the internet something that does not resemble where we are now. I mean, all these things we imagine how they're going to go, and where society is headed, or what some technology is going to do, and then it does what it do. This it's always a surprise to me. But
Yeah. Well, I think
it
some of
sounds
that though is because we just put it out there and we're like, let's see what happens. And we don't sit there and talk about. I guess I'm more like with the AI stuff that's coming out.
yeah,
My tendency is to sit there and like want to talk about it a lot before you release it. But now that it's out, it's like, well, screw it, it's out. Like now we're just gonna see what happens. So might as well jump in and play with it.
yeah.
But
I think it's really exciting, but and I did play with it a little bit right at the very beginning, and then I was like, I think this thing does a lot of the same things that I do. I think the kinds of processes that it pushes images through, like this feels very familiar. What I hope it's not exactly the same, but a lot of the way that because collage is a big part of how I would sort of generate images
mhm.
uh, and so this just sort of you know, a lot of my paintings for many years was okay, Google search. I'm thinking about specific ideas or imagery. Google search, look at every single one.
Yeah.
Go to the 40th page and collect them all in a big, in a big folder, and then print them out. Like literally print them out because I'm a scissors and glue and pencils light table kind of person and play with them, cut them up, relate them to one another very physically, and sometimes without a lot of tact or sensitivity about how they get mutilated. Just kind of like, oh, the way these forms are starting to relate until the point where oh, we've deviated entirely from what we were trying to do, but the imagery is just getting rich and eccentric and interesting, so we just take it there. I've seen that, when playing with that AI as well. So it's kind of creepy.
Yeah, and it feels like the automatic drawing a bit too, like the kind of like the understanding of how to build form, but you kind of take it to like a obsessive, insane, like graphomaniac, like just following the forms and the contortions and stuff. It's actually been harder for me to sit around and just doodle after playing with the
Uh-huh.
AI because I'm like, nah, that's just like everyone looks at it and they're like, oh, that's so cool. And I always thought, well, it's just kind of like a little party trick that I've learned how to do. And then when I
Mhm.
see the AI do it, I'm like, yeah, it is just this party trick. Like I'm not, it's strange.
Well, one thing about the strange of it and the way that those images have a kind of strangeness to it that you think, well, okay, that just sort of happens when you doodle, when you're sort of mindlessly working. There's a kind of, I would just say, I don't know how to put it, but to me, there's a kind of uncanny queasiness that happens, and you think, oh, this
Mhm.
is compelling. This is hitting me in my gut. This is something's happening when I'm looking at. You think, oh, that's easy to do. Apparently, like the thing is, um, apparently that's incredibly easy to generate and may not be as deep or as interesting as you imagine. Like when you do it yourself and you don't see that it's a parlor trick that a machine can do, or like you think, well, maybe there's something really deep going on here. If I, but maybe that is just an easy way of getting a reaction, and um, that a human intelligence probably can do more and different from that. And so far, the AI, that's pretty much the biggest like hit where I feel like, oh, I'm moved by this. It's always that same unsettling thing.
Yeah.
But what else have you got? And I feel like, and maybe it will get to other places, but right now, that seems to be what it does. It does very well, and it feels very compelling and real. But what is it? And maybe that's not. Maybe if my own work goes to that place, maybe I could go somewhere else. Maybe that means I've hit a kind of just this kind of creative aberration or something that maybe a dead end. So that was kind of my response to it. It's like, oh, this is an easy place to go to and probably not very fruitful, and I'm gonna go somewhere else.
Yeah, and it was a instinct I had since I don't know, for the last 20 years, like that the really spooky, impactful, dark, depressing. I was like, it's easy for me to do this. Like the harder thing to do and it would be, I always said I wanted to see a horror film filmed in a field of flowers. And then
Uh-huh.
they made that
Right.
movie Midsummer, and I was like, holy shit, someone pulled it off. But I always thought it's really hard to paint the pretty and the beautiful or the fun and happy and have it not come off as cheesy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas dark and depressing and angsty, like 1990s every album cover, like that seems easy. You
Yeah.
scratch it with a nail and you're good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What
uh,
else is there? Let's move on from that if we can. And where do you go from there? And you can see, that's certainly, there's a tension there in the Domesticated Afterlife of like how where can you go beyond that? And it's certainly something that I deal with in my work too.
well, I think the collage solution is a pretty good one. Like what you're doing in the travel diaries, even though you're saying it feels similar to what the AI is doing, I don't think it would never come to these kind of conclusions. Like collage in the last couple months has actually been helping me because it's not all internal. Like I feel like I
Right.
can see coincidence in a different way. It's not just
Hmm.
plumbing the same pipe in my own mind. I'm getting some outside stimulus.
I
And
really like physical work too, like to make it with your hands and to cut it up and to surprise yourself just by arrangement, by through composition. Yeah, no, yeah. So of course, it's hard to do anything right now and not think about AI. Like everything, it's we're all contending with it.
so this travel diary, all of these are photocopied and cut up by hand.
Yeah.
None of this
And
is Photoshop collage.
well, the Photoshop is all the color, which I
The
didn't even
color.
do. I hired someone very, very good to do the color, which was something I would never have done as a painter or working on drawings, or it just seemed like the most sinful, evil way to make art. But then after working in comics and thinking, oh, people do that. You draw something and then somebody does the color. And so I had um, I had all of my recent work in color, sort of to show to the artist that I hired to do this, Fazila Nasruddin, and she was familiar with how I use color, my sensibility, but I let that go. I'm trying to
Huh.
figure out what is it that is important to me and to my processes, and what can I share or open up or give away, so that I'm doing the thing that's generative, and she's better at it than me. So that was a strange decision to come to for me, but it's been really, really exciting to have somebody else's input into the process too.
It's so surprising to me. I would have thought that this was done in Photoshop and that you were coloring it because just the nature of the collage and it seems so like the end result with the obvious like flat colors and stuff that you get with the computer seems so Photoshoppy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, all the drawing is done just in a little sketchbook, 5x7 sketchbook, and then uh, duplicated and cut up and then drawn back into after collaging. Like the collage isn't it's not just cut up and paste. It's cut up, paste, redraw, cut up again, redraw again.
Hmm.
Continuing that kind of play.
So when you get the colors back, like were you giving her moods or was it just like here's some black and white, here's kind of my typical approach, have fun?
It was here's I had done a little book for Antenna once before this. It was actually I took cereal boxes, because frequently in my painting I've used the kind of color I use is from packaging, or just like take a color idea from that already exists, like from an Alpo bag, or whatever it is, a cereal box or whatever. And so I was making these drawings on adhesive paper and with Sharpies, and then dropping them into cereal boxes, and seeing how the drawing and the color of the drawing and the Sharpies related to that. So I had this body of work and this kind of way of using color already, which I think you can kind of see that kind of cereal box kind of like the
Yeah.
color in it is is it's not it's not subtle. It's coming full on. So I had a body of work like this, at which I shared with her, and I said, and then it was kind of like, yeah, have at it. And then there was a little back and forth, but mostly not. Mostly like surrender and let somebody else take it. It's kind of a scary but really kind of fun thing to see what happens. So I've also thought about, like, would it be nice to do just the line drawing as a separate book, like as a complement to this, like take the color out and make that
Yeah.
available, almost like a coloring book or something. Because I think that it's a different, I like looking at them without the color too. I feel like the color charges them, it makes them complete, but the line drawing is kind of fun too. So I don't know. We'll see.
Do you feel, because that's really interesting to me. I would have never guessed that. And like I think I would be scared. I'm too much of a control freak. But um was there any, because you talk about like that your work, it seems like your work teaches you stuff. Was
Yeah.
there a real learning lesson then from watching someone else work on top of your work? And do you think you would learn, like if you put it out in a coloring book version and you saw 20
I would love
people?
to. Yeah. I would love to see how other people interpret this too. And yeah, it was a learning experience. First off, um, she would make some decisions, and I'd think, well, how'd she know to do it? That's what I would have done. Like,
Huh.
oh no, I thought I was special. I thought I was the one who understood this the best. And then there are things that she did, and I'm like, I would have never thought of this in a million years, and it's so much better. Oh, I have to surrender to the idea that I might not be the best person to handle every part of this project. And like I was talking before we started about my day job, and the kind of artists that I engage with in my work, public artists, it's all collaborative. They may make a design and hire fabricators. They may, they parcel out the work. They have assistants. They have, so like
Yeah.
that's kind of conditioned me as well as along with working in comics a little bit to the idea that okay, you don't have your hand doesn't have to be in every single thing for it to have value and go someplace interesting. And those surprises and extending it that way has been kind of cool. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
That's a weird attack on ego on both sides. Like, A, I'm not special, and B, someone did the like the thing I did great, 20 other people could do, and the
Yeah,
thing that I didn't do, someone's doing better. Yeah, that would be
yeah, for
interesting.
sure. And I know it would have taken me so much longer, and I don't know. They just to me it was like yeah, it was humbling, but also kind of thrilling. So I'm looking for ways. I've been looking for ways to collaborate beyond this. I've tried a few times to sort of start collaborations on storytelling as well, but it's finding my way into that. That hasn't been as successful yet, but I want to find ways beyond being the only person in the process. So we're working that out.
I have some ideas. We can talk.
Okay. Okay.
But also like it's just time. Time is the killer now. But
Right.
I have thought it would be really interesting to um have, like, instead of writing letters to someone, you just kind of send pages back and forth
Yeah.
and like
And
have
that's
a
what that
dialogue
postcard,
that way.
yeah, that postcard thing I mentioned that kind of started this travel diary, that's what that was. The Yeah, so the artist DW, who he did a book for Fantagraphic, Montebank.
Mhm.
If you ever get a chance to check that out, that's what we were doing, and that kind of spurred and inspired this. And I think we both wanted to move into story, but somehow that didn't end up being the result. But yeah, I'm looking for ways to think about that too.
Yeah, the
So,
closest I got is me and Sean working on Abolition of Man together because we were using the AI and we were able to do it. Like I was kind of working on all 5 issues at once because you're just sitting there
mhm,
typing stuff in. And then he was able to write issue 3 after he had seen issue 1, 2, 4, and 5. And then because it was all within a month or so, nothing was going off to print. I was able to go back and rewrite certain lines of dialogue and stuff. And that had that same loss of control where it gets better because that coincidence opens up that you couldn't have
mhm.
and yeah, it is a powerful thing. It would definitely, we'd have to figure out a structure within which that could happen, or maybe not. Maybe the pre-planned
I,
structure is
I'm
better.
game. I'm
Okay.
game for sure.
Well
Cool.
then, we'll come up with something like that. I'm really glad that we talked, because obviously this is, I think, I don't know for you, but there's got like 20 different seeds in my head now of new ideas
Yeah.
that I'll be thinking about.
Well,
Uh,
watching your videos, man, so prolific, turning out incredible interpretations of work and having, I mean, you just have a tremendously thoughtful take on things you're reading on so many levels. The visual, on the formal, on the way that things are made, physically put together, the way they're printed, the way that that your sort of intertextual analysis, like comparing things or understanding their relationship to other things, other texts and other works, just on so many levels. I sent my things to you to look at because I thought we would have something to talk about. And
yeah, I'm
you know,
really regretting not sending you the review first, because I
oh,
think you would have got a kick out of it. But
okay.
yeah, I'll be interested. Yeah, I seriously, when I got this, I was like sitting here being like, fuck, I'm making this book up. Like, I've gone full schizo. I've had a break. Like, I'm making this book up. I'm talking to myself with this. So
Well,
I
and you can
really
see that
appreciate that.
happens to the characters within the book too. There's a bit
Yeah.
of a break that happens with each of them, and I certainly I felt that at moments in making it too. So, yeah, sorry about that. I
No,
guess
no,
I
no.
guess I'm apologizing.
It was awesome, and that's why I was like, I don't know, we have to talk, because this guy obviously has a lot of the same interests. I think one of the things is, and I'd say it a lot on the channel, is art school coming to comics, rather than like
Hmm.
the Dan Clowes, Chris Ware guys who want to do comics going to art school. It's really interesting to hear someone like you kind of talk about reverse engineering your way into narrative, because I feel like there's more and more of that happening, and it's, in my impression of where comics are going, it's being really beneficial for the medium to have people coming the other way. And I think, there's, I feel kind of both cursed and blessed to have that background, because it
Right.
is like this, like you said, can set of constraints on the way that you think that you want to bust out of, but it's also, um I don't know. You're like trained bullshitters, right? Like, you sat through how many critiques of like knowing how to approach a critical analysis of something. So
Hmm.
it's been
Yeah.
really beneficial. I feel, yeah.
I think so. And I definitely see a lot of that in the interesting work that's bubbling up right now. You know, I, I, the work you can find the work at Domino and
Yeah.
Domino Books. Man, there's so. I mean, I just whenever I'm able to buy things and absorb them, that there's no end uh, to the unexpected, surprising, very personal, and very moving kind of directions that work goes in. Those such that's just an example of one of the places I see like, oh yeah, there are all these voices just rushing in right now, and it's thrilling, you
Yeah,
know.
I would like to talk to Austin at Domino Books. We've communicated a little bit, but I just read his Meskin and Umezo book, and that one really felt
Yeah,
like really felt like the foreground of like some of the smartest stuff I've ever read, both literate and artistically. It feels
yeah,
like it's coming from completely outside of the history of the medium,
yeah.
in a great way.
Right, but having that kind of hand, that kind of eye and that kind of hand in comics, it brings this power, like a different kind of power that you're not used to. Just his mark making, just the accumulation of gesture in on each page, and the way that um, it just it vibrates, it radiates off the page. It's
And I think
thrilling.
those are qualities that people don't learn about just looking at comics. Like, I think that's where, what I'm saying, where it's like art school coming to comics, like there is a vocabulary of like the principles of design and the elements of art, and these like kind of just ways of talking about materiality and things that you get in like a fine arts program, that
Mm-hmm.
you don't get in the people sitting around talking about, well, how did, like I know it's Strange Death of Alex Raymond, we're talking about how did he use his brush, but
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like comics guys do that kind of analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're talking like, well, yeah, when you look at your work or Boston's work, it's a different lineage,
Mm-hmm.
basically, different set of concerns. And I find that really, really exciting. So
Yeah.
so you'll have to send me some other stuff that you think is compelling if I'm
Okay.
missing out on stuff. Recommendations for sure.
Yeah, we can do a little correspondence. That would be really great. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Sure.
sure. We'll keep that going. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time, man. We've been going for an hour and a half. It's been a
Oh
real
gosh.
pleasure. And yeah, I've got a couple ideas I'm gonna hit you up
Okay.
with right away.
I'm game.
So yeah, thanks so much, Scott. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for watching. Please, if you have not, go watch the review I did of Scott's work, and then go get the work. It's obviously really impacted me. I think it's really, really powerful stuff. And after talking to you now, Travel Diary like opened up to me even more in a compelling way that I'm gonna go back and sit with that. Like, oh shit, okay, cool. So both of those books, definitely get them.
Thank
You will
you.
not be sad about that. They're great books.
What a great discussion. Thank you so much for doing this. I
Yeah,
really enjoyed it.
pleasure. All right, thanks everyone. Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.